Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going back to the game of Elvenar and we'll start another Spire of Eternity run. We have done another one not a long time ago, but that one was geared towards low-level cities. I was doing it with Chapter 4 city, and primary focus was really on making it simple. So as little thinking as possible, still making it for a successful run. Also pure negotiation. Now this time around it is somewhat different. We will be working with the advanced city this time around. That's pretty much end of chapter 16, so as close to the end game as it's gonna get. So we have all resources available and required by the ghosts. We also going to be fighting when it's appropriate. And as I mentioned before, I think that level 3 is the best suited for fighting. Levels 1 and 2 are perfectly fine to do as part of negotiation strategy. The reason for that in the end game is there's really nothing to use your goods and all kinds of other resources for. Really, most of the tournaments, and that's the primary use of resources, are done with fighting. There's no way you can do it with goods alone or in any significant way. So really you have a lot of goods left and accumulating and nothing to use it for. So using them for negotiation in the Spire is the perfect use for that. Having said that, as I mentioned in the previous run, level 3 is really tough on resources if you're doing pure negotiation. So that's when we're going to be switching to fighting. So until then, the plan is to go level 1, level 2, pure negotiation. Then I'll mention that there might be an exception to that on the final boss, a boss of level 2, because you may consider that doing fighting or you may consider doing it negotiation. That's kind of depends on a few things. And level 3 is going to be mostly fighting, probably close to 100%, but if there are some sketchy matchups, then we might be forced to do negotiation there, but yeah, we'd prefer to avoid that. Now, so for negotiation, for the first 2 levels, so let me bring a nifty overlay for this Spire run. Alright, so as I mentioned again in the previous episodes, I consider costs of different resources in my negotiation strategy. Basically, the harder for me to acquire a particular good, the more expensive it is for me to use it. Hence, if I can avoid using a particular good and substitute it for something cheaper without hurting the odds, then that's what I'm going to do. And while the costs hierarchy in chapter 4 was fairly straightforward because, well, we only had coin supplies, T1 and T2 goods, in chapter 16, or pretty much anything past, when do we get the last sentient goods? I think that's in that's in constructs. So anything past constructs, you will have full setup of goods, and it's quite a few. So if you look to the right side, you can see all the goods that can be used in negotiation. And here are some costs that I attach to them, and these are specific to this particular city, even though I can imagine they're not far off for many Chapter 16 cities. So I'll quickly elaborate why the costs are the way they are. So the cheapest are supplies and mana. These are basically free. Supplies are capped. Past Chapter 15 workshops, and especially magic workshops, have massive production values. You can juice them with pop enchantments, and on top of that, yeah, you can run shorter productions up to 5 minutes. Well, probably no one does that, but yeah, you can produce a lot more supplies if you are able to do shorter productions, like an hour or 15 minutes ones. So it's pretty easy to go from practically zero in supplies to getting maxed out. Mana, similarly, while there are no sort of quick production ways for mana the way there are for supplies, but there's really no use for mana in the end game. And if you have Dragon Abbey, and most people do, even somewhat leveled up, and you have quite a few enchantments, then you can generate pretty much arbitrary amounts of mana on demand. And even if you don't, then yeah, it's one of the expiring goods, so if you don't use it, you lose it. Bottom line for mana, usually I reach my maximum capacity, well, maximum supported by mana decay, and it just stays there, so I might as well dump it into the Spire. So the next level up is coins. Coins, again, very similar to supplies, except they cannot really be easily produced on demand outside of the neighborly help, which is significant, and you can gain a lot of that. But the thing with coins is you may need a lot of them in the Spire, and while on a longer term basis, as in on a weekly basis, yeah, you will have probably more than enough coins to cover all your needs, including the Spire. But if you do Spire in the short bursts, then you may actually run out, or at least getting low on coins in the short term. So there's that. Of course, there are always, for both supplies and coins, instants, but that's kind of last resort, because these are, I mean, they're sort of renewable, but not as much. So then level 2, so to speak, are sentient goods. They're kind of all the same. I produce roughly the similar amounts, and it's similar story to mana. There's no real use for them. They're not used in tournaments. They're not used pretty much anywhere else in the end game after you're done with the research. So if you don't use it, you lose it. If you have decent generation capacity for sentience, then again you have decent amounts just sitting there. So yeah, might as well just dump them in the Spire. Plus, I mean, for sentience, unlike for some other goods, because they're produced in manufacturers, you can juice them up with magical manufacturing spells, so for pretty significant boosts if you need it. So the next steps up are regular goods, and the only reason they step up from sentience is because there's no cap, there's no decay. So basically anything you lose, you just lose. Having said that, for all practical purposes, well, you just accumulate them again unless you use them in tournaments. I don't, so for me, again, there's not really much that I can use the regular goods for. You can see that T2 goods are slightly higher than the rest. That's kind of a temporary thing for this city. Based on the research and upgrades in chapter 16, I'm kind of running relatively low on T2 goods in this city. So the costs, what I put them up, is slightly up. Which brings us to two resources that actually are valuable from that perspective, because everything else is, yeah, well, we can sort them out, but realistically, I don't really care. So there are seeds. Seeds are at level 5 or cost level 5 here. Again, on one hand, it's a decaying resource. So if you don't use it, you lose it, but there's no easy way to ramp up production if you're running low. There's just none. I mean, you can have some production capabilities in addition to your regular ancient wonders, but in absence of that, event buildings, festival merchants and stuff like that. And yeah, you don't really get a whole lot of them. So if you blow through a good chunk of your seeds, it's not necessarily fast to bring it back. Plus, seeds are used in a lot of upgrades in the late game in non-trivial amounts. And of course, that's an input to all the sentient goods that, well, they might not be super valuable, but if you need them, well, you'll need to have seeds to produce them. So seeds are kind of valuable. And the last but not the least is orcs. So those of you who have been in chapter 15, 16, especially 16, know that there's a ton of orcs that are required for research and for upgrades. There's a ton of upgrades that require a crap ton of orcs. So yeah, even if you have a lot of armors, a lot of orc nests, and you think you have a lot of orcs in stash, you probably don't. I mean, I was getting up to what, 700,000, and that could be gone in very quickly, because when we're looking at upgrades, we are looking at numbers approaching like 100k per single upgrade. And again, there's no easy way to quickly produce orcs in any meaningful amounts. So orcs is the absolute last resort good. So of course I'm going to use it if I have to, but I'll use just about anything else if I can. So that's, well, I guess not so brief explanation of different costs. Yeah, just one more thing. When we're talking about costs, these are not one-to-one costs. These are relative to the ratios that the game establishes. So for instance, generally speaking, Elvenar considers coins to supplies ratio at 10 to 1. So basically, if one of the ghosts asks you for, I don't know, let's say 100k in coins, if somebody would be on the same encounter asking for supplies, they'd be asking for 10k. So from that perspective, that's the game considers these amounts to be roughly equivalent. So, and from the perspective of this cost table that you can see here, if you see the same cost level for two resources, let's say for marble and steel, both at 3, that means that the same, well, actually probably a better example would be supplies and mana. So if, for instance, there's, actually I don't remember the exact amounts, but let's say one ghost requires 10k in supplies, and in the same encounter another ghost requires 50k of mana, meaning the game considers these two amounts roughly equivalent. So from that perspective, I would consider these amounts to be equivalent as well if I have them at the same cost. If, let's say, I put supplies at cost level 0 but mana at cost level 2, that would mean that in this scenario I'd rather pay 10k in supplies rather than 50k in mana. So again, so these costs that I have here on the table are not absolute. These are relative to the parity amounts that the game establishes. All right. Last but not the least, there's a big percentage number and colors and some resource names down below. And the big number, of course, is going to be a calculated success ratio or success percentage at a particular stage in negotiation. So with the resource setup right below that, showing what would be the best move to make in order to maximize our success ratio. Again, the way it's done is we're trying to first of all maximize our chances of success. So no matter what the cost is, we don't jeopardize success ratio. But if we have different setups in terms of what we can offer that produce the same success ratio, then we will be picking up the one which is cheaper for us according to the cost table above. So that's kind of it. That's a fairly long preamble, and I'll probably make a cut here. So we'll start the actual run in the next episode. See you soon.